Superman Tower of Power Incident. On June 21, 2007, 13-year-old Caitlin Lassiter arrived at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom with her family for what should have been a perfect summer day. The Louisville amusement park was bustling with visitors eager to escape the heat on the various rides and attractions. Caitlin, an active middle school student from nearby Elizabethtown, had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. She was particularly excited about the Superman Tower of Power, the park's signature thrill ride that dominated the skyline at 177 feet tall. The Superman Tower of Power was considered one of the most popular attractions at Kentucky Kingdom. The ride worked by seating passengers in a circular gondola with their feet dangling freely beneath them. A sophisticated cable and pulley system would lift riders to the top of the tower, pause for a moment to build suspense, then release them into a controlled free fall back toward the ground. The sensation of weightlessness combined with the panoramic view of Louisville made it a must-ride attraction for thrill seekers. Safety harnesses secured riders around their torso and shoulders, while their legs hung unrestrained below the seats. Caitlin joined the line with her family members, watching as previous groups of riders screamed with delight during their descent. The ride operators went through their routine safety checks, ensuring all harnesses were properly secured before initiating the lifting sequence. Everything appeared normal as Caitlin's group was loaded into the gondola seats. The massive tower stretched high above them, and she could feel the anticipation building as the ride began its slow ascent. At approximately 40 feet above the ground, something went catastrophically wrong. One of the main support cables suddenly snapped under tension, creating a whip-like effect as the severed cable lashed across the ride's gondola. The steel cable, moving at tremendous speed and force, struck multiple riders before they could react. In an instant, what had been a moment of anticipation turned into absolute horror. Caitlin bore the worst of the cable's impact. The severed steel wire struck her legs with such force that both feet were completely amputated above the ankles. The other riders in the gondola screamed in terror as they witnessed the unthinkable accident unfold. Blood immediately began flowing from Caitlin's severe injuries while she remained conscious and aware of what had happened to her. The ride operators, seeing the emergency situation, immediately halted the lifting mechanism and began emergency descent procedures. Park security and medical personnel rushed to the scene as soon as the gondola returned to ground level. Caitlin remained remarkably calm despite her traumatic injuries, even asking about her severed feet. Emergency medical technicians quickly applied tourniquets and began life-saving treatment while preparing her for immediate transport to University Hospital. The other passengers, though physically unharmed, were deeply traumatized by witnessing such a horrific accident. The Superman Tower of Power was immediately shut down pending a full investigation. Caitlin survived her injuries but faced a lifetime of challenges adapting to her permanent disability. The accident led to industry-wide reviews of cable inspection procedures and ride safety protocols. Six Flags ultimately settled with the family for an undisclosed amount, while the ride was permanently removed from the park. The incident became a watershed moment for amusement park safety standards across the entire industry. Big Dipper roller coaster derailment incident. On May 30th, 1972, families across London flocked to Battersea Fun Fair to celebrate the holiday weekend. The popular amusement park located along the Thames had been a beloved destination for generations of Londoners seeking thrills and entertainment. Among the fair's most popular attractions was the Big Dipper, a classic wooden roller coaster that had been delighting visitors since 1951. The aging ride, with its traditional white-painted wooden structure and steep drops, represented the golden age of British seaside entertainment. The Big Dipper stood as a testament to post-war optimism, built when the country was recovering and families were eager for simple pleasures. The coaster featured a series of hills and curves typical of wooden coasters from that era, reaching speeds of approximately 35 miles per hour. Its cars could hold up to 20 passengers at a time, and on busy days like this holiday weekend, the ride operated continuously with minimal downtime between cycles. The wooden track, supported by an intricate framework of timber beams and cross braces, had weathered more than 2 decades of London's harsh climate. Among the holiday crowd were several families with children, including groups of teenagers who had come to the fair specifically for the thrill rides. The Big Dipper's line stretched long on this busy afternoon, with excited riders waiting their turn to experience the classic coaster. Many of these visitors had ridden the Big Dipper countless times over the years, trusting in its familiar rhythms and well-worn safety record. The ride operators, following their standard procedures, loaded passengers into the train cars and secured the simple lap bars that served as the primary restraint system. As the fully loaded train climbed the first major hill, building potential energy for the exciting descent ahead, passengers could see across the Thames and the London skyline beyond. The mechanical chain lift carried them steadily upward with its characteristic clicking sound. Everything seemed perfectly normal as the train crested the first hill and began picking up speed on the downward slope. The familiar sensations of acceleration and mild airtime brought squeals of delight from the passengers. Then, as the train approached a banked curve at high speed, catastrophic structural failure occurred. A critical section of the wooden track structure collapsed without warning, unable to support the dynamic forces of the speeding train. The lead cars immediately derailed, leaving the track entirely and plummeting toward the ground below. Passengers were thrown from their seats as the cars tumbled and crashed into the support structure beneath the track. The wooden framework, never designed to catch falling train cars, splintered and collapsed under the impact. 5 people died instantly from the devastating crash, while 13 others sustained serious injuries ranging from broken bones to severe trauma. The screams of the injured and terrified witnesses filled the air as park staff and visitors rushed to help. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the tangled wreckage of wooden beams, twisted metal, and overturned train cars made rescue efforts extremely difficult. Some victims remained trapped beneath the debris for hours, while rescue workers carefully dismantled the collapsed structure. The investigation that followed revealed that structural fatigue and inadequate maintenance had compromised the ride's safety. The wooden support beams had deteriorated over the years, weakened by weather exposure and the constant stress of train operations. Following this tragedy, the Big Dipper was permanently removed and Battersea Fun Fair never reopened. The incident led to comprehensive safety reforms throughout the British amusement industry, establishing new standards for ride inspection and maintenance that continue to protect visitors today. Verrückt Waterslide Death Incident. On August 7, 2016, 10-year-old Caleb Schwab arrived at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City with his family for what should have been a fun-filled summer day. Caleb was the son of Scott Schwab, a Kansas state legislator, and like many children his age, he was drawn to the park's most famous attraction. Towering above the water park, at 168 feet and 7 inches tall, stood Verrückt, officially recognized as the world's tallest water slide. The German word verrückt means insane, a name that proved to be tragically prophetic. Verrückt had opened just 2 years earlier amid great fanfare and media attention. The massive slide featured a unique multi-person raft system where 3 riders would be secured together in a specially designed inflatable raft. The ride began with a steep 17-story drop, followed by a second hill that created a moment of weightlessness before the final descent into a splash pool. The slide's designers had incorporated overhead safety netting along portions of the ride to prevent rafts from becoming airborne, a safety feature that acknowledged the extreme forces generated by the attraction. The ride's operation depended on precise weight distribution among the 3 passengers. Safety guidelines specified that the combined weight of all riders should fall within a specific range to ensure the raft maintained proper contact with the slide surface throughout the journey. However, these weight requirements were often loosely enforced during busy periods, and park staff frequently allowed combinations of riders that fell outside the recommended parameters. On this particular day, the park was crowded with families enjoying the summer heat relief that the water attractions provided. Caleb was excited to experience the world record slide, despite being smaller than the typical rider. He was paired with 2 adult women in the 3-person raft, creating a weight distribution that was significantly below the recommended minimum. The raft was secured at the top of the 168-foot tower, with all 3 riders strapped in using Velcro and nylon restraints. Park attendants gave their standard safety briefing before releasing the raft down the steep initial drop. The raft accelerated rapidly down the first massive drop, reaching speeds approaching 70 miles per hour as it hit the bottom and began climbing the second hill. Due to the improper weight distribution, the raft carried too much momentum as it crested the second hill. Instead of following the slide's surface as designed, the raft became completely airborne for several feet. The lightweight raft, with insufficient weight to keep it grounded, flew upward toward the overhead safety netting that was meant to protect riders from exactly this scenario. Caleb, seated in the front of the raft, struck the metal supports of the overhead netting with devastating force. The impact caused fatal head and neck injuries, while the 2 adult passengers suffered serious but non-fatal injuries as the raft crashed back down onto the slide surface. Park staff immediately initiated emergency procedures, but Caleb's injuries were beyond any medical intervention. The other riders were rushed to nearby hospitals for treatment of their injuries. Verrückt was immediately and permanently closed following the accident. The subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of safety violations and design flaws that had been ignored since the ride's construction. Criminal charges were filed against several park executives and the ride's designer for reckless behavior and second-degree murder. Evidence emerged showing that engineers had repeatedly warned about safety issues during construction, but these concerns were dismissed in favor of meeting opening deadlines. The slide was completely demolished in 2018, and the incident led to comprehensive reforms in waterslide safety regulations nationwide. Haunted Castle Fire Incident. On May 11, 1984, Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey was experiencing one of its busiest spring evenings of the season. The warm weather had drawn large crowds to the popular theme park, with families and groups of teenagers eager to experience the various rides and attractions. Among the park's most popular draws was the Haunted Castle, a walk-through dark ride that promised visitors a terrifying journey through a maze-like structure filled with ghosts, monsters, and other frightening surprises. The attraction had become a must-visit destination for thrill-seekers looking for a different kind of adrenaline rush. The Haunted Castle was housed in a large castle-themed building that had been constructed as a temporary structure, but had remained in operation for several years. Inside, visitors would navigate through a series of narrow corridors, dark rooms, and tight passages while costumed actors and mechanical effects provided scares along the way. The building's interior was decorated with foam padding, fabric hangings, and various props designed to create an authentically spooky atmosphere. These decorative materials, while effective for creating the desired ambiance, were highly flammable and had never been treated with fire-resistant chemicals. 8 teenagers, including a group of friends from nearby towns, had decided to experience the haunted castle together that evening. They were typical of the attraction's target demographic, young people seeking thrills and the social bonding that comes from shared scary experiences. The group purchased their tickets and joined the line outside the castle's entrance, joking nervously about what they might encounter inside. None of them could have imagined that this routine visit to a popular theme park attraction would end in tragedy. The building's design created several inherent safety hazards that would prove fatal. The maze-like layout included numerous dead ends and confusing pathways intended to disorient visitors as part of the entertainment experience. However, this same design made emergency evacuation extremely difficult, as there were very limited exit routes and no clear sightlines of safety. The building lacked a sprinkler system, smoke detection equipment, and adequate emergency lighting that would have been required in permanent structures housing public attractions. Shortly after 6:30 p.m., a small fire began in one of the foam-padded walls deep within the attraction. The exact cause was never definitively determined, but investigators suspected that either an electrical malfunction or a discarded cigarette had ignited the highly combustible foam materials. Within minutes, the flames spread rapidly through the interconnected rooms and corridors, fed by the abundant flammable decorations and furniture throughout the structure. The building quickly filled with thick, toxic smoke that made visibility nearly impossible. Visitors inside the attraction initially thought the smoke and heat were part of the show, as special effects were commonly used to enhance the scary atmosphere. By the time people realized they were in genuine danger, the fire had spread extensively, blocking many of the limited exit routes. The maze-like interior, designed to confuse visitors under normal circumstances, became a death trap as panicked people tried desperately to find their way out through the smoke-filled corridors. The 8 teenagers became separated and lost in the burning maze. Despite the efforts of emergency responders who arrived quickly at the scene, all 8 young people died from smoke inhalation before they could be rescued. The victims ranged in age from 15 to 18 years old, their lives cut short by a preventable tragedy that exposed serious gaps in amusement park safety regulations. The investigation that followed revealed numerous safety violations and regulatory failures. The structure had been approved as a temporary building but had operated for years without meeting permanent building codes. Criminal charges were filed against several park officials, and the incident led to comprehensive reforms in fire safety requirements for all amusement park attractions nationwide. The tragedy at the Haunted Castle became a turning point that fundamentally changed how the industry approaches safety in entertainment venues. Worlds of Fun Decapitation Incident. On June 7, 1981, Worlds of Fun amusement park in Kansas City was operating under typical summer conditions with moderate crowds enjoying the various attractions throughout the facility. The park's signature roller coaster, the Orient Express, had been thrilling visitors since its opening, featuring a unique design that included multiple inversions and high-speed elements that made it one of the most popular rides in the Midwest. The coaster's distinctive red and yellow trains regularly carried passengers through a series of loops, corkscrews, and banking turns that provided an intense but generally safe riding experience for thousands of visitors each operating season. William Haithcote was a 20-year-old seasonal maintenance worker who had been employed at the park for several weeks. Like many young people working summer jobs at amusement parks, he was eager to prove himself reliable and thorough in his duties. William had been assigned to perform routine maintenance inspections on various rides throughout the park, a responsibility that required him to examine track conditions, mechanical components, and safety systems to ensure everything was functioning properly. These inspections were typically scheduled during off-peak hours, or when rides were temporarily shut down for maintenance purposes. On this particular afternoon, William was conducting what should have been a routine inspection of the Orient Express roller coaster. The standard protocol required that all ride operations cease completely before any maintenance personnel entered the restricted areas around the track. Multiple safety procedures were in place to prevent exactly the type of accident that was about to occur, including communication systems between ride operators and maintenance staff, physical lockout procedures for ride controls, and clearly marked boundaries that separated operational areas from maintenance zones. The Orient Express continued to operate normally, with trains full of passengers completing their circuits through the various inversions and high-speed sections of the track. The ride operators in the control booth maintained their standard monitoring procedures, watching for any irregularities in the ride's operation while managing the loading and dispatching of successive trains. The mechanical systems functioned exactly as designed, with block zones and safety sensors ensuring that trains maintained proper spacing and operated within safe parameters. Something went catastrophically wrong with the communication and safety protocols that should have prevented any maintenance worker from entering a restricted area while the ride remained operational. Williams somehow gained access to an area immediately adjacent to the active roller coaster track, placing himself directly in the path of the speeding trains. Whether this was due to a breakdown in communication between departments, inadequate training on safety procedures, or a momentary lapse in judgment, the result was the same. As one of the Orient Express trains rounded a curve at full operational speed, it struck William with tremendous force. The impact was instantly fatal, causing severe trauma that resulted in his decapitation. The passengers on the train experienced the horrific shock of witnessing this tragic accident, while the ride operators immediately initiated emergency shutdown procedures upon realizing what had occurred. The train was brought to a stop as quickly as the safety systems allowed, and emergency services were summoned to the scene. The immediate aftermath of the accident sent shockwaves throughout the amusement park industry. Worlds of Fun permanently closed the Orient Express and conducted a comprehensive review of all safety procedures and training protocols. The investigation revealed critical failures in the communication systems and safety procedures that should have prevented any maintenance worker from accessing restricted areas during ride operation. Criminal charges were considered, though the focus ultimately shifted to implementing systematic changes that would prevent similar tragedies. The incident led to industry-wide reforms in maintenance safety protocols, including mandatory lockout-tagout procedures, improved communication systems between departments, and enhanced training requirements for all personnel working in proximity to operating rides. William Heathcote's death became a catalyst for fundamental changes in how amusement parks approach worker safety, establishing standards that continue to protect maintenance personnel today. Sarah Guillard-Guillot. On June 29, 2013, fans of Cirque du Soleil watched in horror as a performance turned deadly at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Sarah Guillard-Guillot, a 31-year-old French aerialist, was performing in Ka, one of the company's most technically advanced productions. Guillard-Guillot had spent over 22 years training as an acrobat and had been with Cirque du Soleil for 7 years. She was known for her precise movements and absolute control in the air. That night, she was part of the show's climactic final battle scene, where performers simulate vertical combat while suspended by cables against a wall that tilts at a 90-degree angle. As the scene progressed, Guillard-Guillot was being hoisted toward the ceiling, approximately 94 feet above the stage. Without warning, her safety wire severed. The audience initially thought her plunge was part of the choreography. Some even applauded, not realizing what they were witnessing, but cast members instantly knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. In seconds, she disappeared into a pit below the stage, out of the audience's view. The fall was not instantly fatal. Guillard-Guillot was still conscious when crew members reached her. She was bleeding heavily from multiple traumatic injuries. Medical staff attempted emergency treatment, but the damage to her body was too extensive. She was pronounced dead at University Medical Center later that night. Investigators later discovered that the wire had been worn down from constant friction during hundreds of performances. Each show had weakened the cable slightly, creating invisible damage that was impossible to detect until the moment it snapped. Her death sent shockwaves through Cirque du Soleil, a company that had performed over 50,000 shows without a single fatal accident. The show that had made audiences gasp in wonder had claimed the life of one of its stars. Alan Campbell. On August 20th, 1994, audiences at Circus International in Honolulu, Hawaii, witnessed one of the most horrific animal attacks in circus history. Alan Campbell, a veteran elephant trainer with years of experience, was working with an African elephant named Tyke. The 8,000-pound elephant had shown signs of aggression in previous performances, but was still considered manageable by her handlers. As Campbell directed Tyke through her routine, something changed in the animal's demeanor. Without warning, Tyke suddenly turned on a groomer who was in the ring. Campbell immediately rushed to intervene. mind, attempting to redirect the elephant's attention away from his colleague. It was a decision that would cost him his life. With a speed that belied her massive size, Tyke swung her trunk and knocked Campbell to the ground. Before he could scramble to safety, the elephant brought her full weight down on his body. The crowd watched in terror as she repeatedly crushed him beneath her feet. The force was catastrophic. His chest cavity collapsed instantly and internal organs were ruptured beyond repair. Campbell was still conscious for several agonizing seconds, gasping for breath as his lungs filled with blood. Medical experts later explained that death in such cases comes from a combination of massive internal hemorrhaging and asphyxiation, as the chest can no longer expand to draw breath. After killing Campbell, Tyke burst through the arena doors and escaped into the streets of Honolulu. For nearly 30 minutes, she rampaged through the city, injuring several bystanders. Police officers pursued the elephant, firing repeatedly at her enormous body. It took a staggering 86 bullets to finally bring Tyke down. When officers reached the fallen animal, her massive form was riddled with bullet holes, blood pooling beneath her on the city street. Hagenbeck-Wallace Circus train. On June 22, 1918, one of the deadliest disasters in circus history unfolded near Hammond, Indiana. The Hagenbeck-Wallace circus train had stopped on the main track due to an overheated axle box. Most of the 400 performers and workers were asleep in the wooden sleeping cars, exhausted from the previous day's performances. It was approximately 4 o'clock a.m., and the train's warning flares burned brightly in the pre-dawn darkness. Behind them, an empty military troop train was approaching at high speed. Its engineer, Alonzo Sargent, had fallen asleep at the throttle after taking medication. He missed multiple warning signals along the tracks. The flares marking the stopped circus train went unnoticed in his unconscious state. Moving at nearly 35 miles per hour, the locomotive plowed directly into the rear sleeping cars of the circus train. The impact was devastating. The wooden circus cars immediately splintered like matchboxes. Bodies were thrown from bunks as the structure collapsed around them. But the true horror came seconds later when the kerosene lamps used to light the cars ignited the wooden debris. Within moments, the wreckage was engulfed in flames. Many victims, already injured from the impact, found themselves trapped in the burning wreckage. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Those who survived the initial collision faced an even more horrific death as flames consumed the train. Survivors later described hearing the screams of their colleagues as they struggled to escape the inferno. Some managed to crawl through windows or gaps in the wreckage, while others remained pinned beneath debris as the fire reached them. Rescuers arrived quickly, but could do little against the intensity of the blaze. By morning, 86 circus performers and workers had perished. Most bodies were burned beyond recognition, their features completely obliterated by the flames. The intensity of the fire had melted metal and fused bones together. Lillian Leitzel. On February 13, 1931, the Copenhagen Circus in Denmark hosted a performance by Lillian Leitzel, widely regarded as the greatest aerialist of her generation. Standing just 4'9" tall, but possessing extraordinary strength, the 39-year-old circus star had become famous for her signature one-arm planches, a move where she would swing her body over her shoulder repeatedly while hanging by one hand from a Roman ring. That winter evening, Leitzel ascended to her apparatus suspended 40 feet above the ground. She wore no safety net beneath her, a standard choice for elite performers of that era who believed nets diminish the dramatic effect of their acts. The audience watched in awe as she began her routine, executing movements with the precision and grace that had made her the highest paid circus performer in the world. As she transitioned into her famous planches, something catastrophic happened. The metal swivel connecting her rope to the rigging suddenly snapped. The sound was barely audible over the music, but the effect was immediate and devastating. Leitzel plummeted toward the ground, her small body twisting in the air during the 40-foot fall. She struck the ground with terrible force. The impact fractured her spine and caused severe internal injuries, but did not kill her instantly. Medical staff rushed to her side as the audience sat in stunned silence. She was conscious, in excruciating pain, and struggling to breathe as her damaged lungs filled with fluid. Doctors later explained that the fall had ruptured blood vessels throughout her body, causing massive internal bleeding. For 2 days, Leitzel fought for her life in a Copenhagen hospital. Her body, which had defied gravity thousands of times before, could not overcome the trauma. Her breathing became increasingly labored as pneumonia developed in her damaged lungs. On February 15th, surrounded by circus colleagues, Lillian Leitzel died from complications of her injuries, the Flying Wallendas. On January 30th, 1962, the State Fair Coliseum in Detroit was packed with spectators, eager to witness the Flying Wallendas perform their legendary 7-person pyramid. The Wallenda family had perfected this death-defying act over generations, creating a human structure 35 feet above the ground with no safety net below. The top tier consisted of Carl Wallenda's son-in-law Richard Fognan, his nephew Dieter Schepp, and Carl's adopted son Mario. As the lights dimmed and spotlights focused on the wire, the family ascended to their positions. With practiced precision precision, they formed the three-tier pyramid, an act they had performed flawlessly hundreds of times before. Karl Wallenda, the 57-year-old patriarch of the family, anchored the formation in the rear. Then, without warning, Dieter Schepp at the front of the formation lost his balance. His body tensed as he tried to correct, but the slight shift rippled through the connected performers. Within seconds, the precision of the pyramid disintegrated as bodies began to fall. The crowd gasped collectively as the formation collapsed. Richard Fahnen and Dieter Schepp plummeted directly to the ground. The impact was devastating. Both men died instantly upon impact, their necks broken and internal organs ruptured from the force. Another family member, Karl's son-in-law, Janne Schepp, survived the initial fall but suffered catastrophic spinal injuries that left him permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Karl Wallenda himself clung to the wire as the pyramid collapsed around him. In a desperate attempt to save others, he reached out to grab falling family members but could not prevent the tragedy unfolding beneath him. The sound of bodies striking the ground echoed throughout the arena, followed by screams from the audience. Medical personnel rushed to the fallen performers, but for Fahnen and Dieter Schepp, no intervention could reverse the fatal damage caused by their 35-foot fall onto the hard Coliseum floor. Otto Kline. On April 14, 1915, the Barnum and Bailey Circus was performing at Madison Square Garden in New York City. Otto Kline, a 28-year-old equestrian star billed as the world's most daring rough rider, was the headline act that evening. His specialty was a dangerous vaulting technique where he would leap onto and over galloping horses, performing aerial somersaults before landing perfectly on the animal's back. The packed arena buzzed with anticipation as Kline entered the ring for his signature finale. He was known for his impeccable timing and seemingly effortless control. As his white horse galloped around the circular track at full speed, Kline prepared for his most challenging maneuver, a forward flip over the horse, requiring him to release and recapture the pommel of the saddle mid-air. As the horse rounded the far curve of the ring, Kline launched himself upward with characteristic confidence. His body rotated forward through the air, but something was wrong. His timing, always perfect in hundreds of previous performances, was slightly off. His fingers grazed, but failed to secure a firm grip on the pommel as he descended. Instead of landing on the horse's back, Kline's body continued its arc directly into the ring's barrier wall. The impact was violent and direct. His skull struck the hard edge of the wall with tremendous force. Witnesses described the sickening sound of bone meeting solid surface as Kline's body crumpled to the ground. Blood immediately began pooling around his head as he lay motionless in the sawdust. Medical attendants rushed into the ring while the horse continued circling, now riderless. Kline was still breathing, but the fracture to his skull had caused catastrophic brain damage. His body twitched involuntarily as internal bleeding compressed vital brain tissue. He was rushed to Bellevue Hospital, where doctors determined his injury was unsurvivable. Otto Kline died 3 hours later without regaining consciousness. The precise skill that had made him famous ultimately betrayed by a fraction of a second's mistiming. The Jayne Mansfield crash incident. On June 29, 1967, Jayne Mansfield prepared for a late-night drive from Biloxi to New Orleans. The 34-year-old Hollywood actress had just finished a nightclub performance at the Gus Stevens Supper Club. Mansfield sat in the front passenger seat of a 1966 Buick Electra 225. Her boyfriend, lawyer Sam Brody, occupied the seat behind the driver. Ronnie Harrison, a 20-year-old driver, sat behind the wheel. In the back seat, 3 children slept peacefully. Mariska Hargitay, age 3, and her 2 brothers, Mickey 6 and Zoltan 8. The group departed Biloxi around 12:30 a.m. Highway 90 stretched ahead through the Louisiana darkness. Dense fog had settled over the coastal highway, reducing visibility to less than a quarter mile. The Buick's headlights cut through the humid air as Harrison maintained highway speed. Mansfield wore a blonde wig and had been drinking earlier in the evening. The children remained asleep in the back seat, unaware of the journey ahead. Around 2:25 a.m., the Buick approached a construction zone near Slidell, Louisiana. A truck ahead was spraying pesticide to control the mosquito population, creating additional fog and reducing visibility even further. The spray truck moved slowly, about 15 miles per hour, with a large tank trailer following behind it. Warning signs and flares marked the construction area, but the dense fog obscured them from approaching traffic. Harrison failed to see the slow-moving vehicles ahead. The Buick was traveling approximately 70 miles per hour when it approached the rear of the tractor trailer. The fog had become so thick that the truck's taillights were barely visible. Harrison had less than 2 seconds to react once he spotted the obstacle ahead. The Buick struck the rear of the trailer at nearly full highway speed. The car's front end dove underneath the trailer's rear bumper. The trailer's underside, positioned at exactly the height of the car's roofline, acted like a blade. The impact sheared off the entire top portion of the Buick's passenger compartment. The roof was severed cleanly at window level, crushing everything above the dashboard. The 3 adults in the front seat died instantly from massive head trauma. Mansfield's blonde wig was torn from her head and thrown onto the highway, leading to widespread but false reports that she had been decapitated. Brody and Harrison also suffered fatal head injuries from the trailer's underside. The 4th force of the impact drove the car forward several more feet before it came to rest beneath the trailer. The children in the back seat survived the crash with various injuries. The rear portion of the car remained largely intact, protecting them from the trailer that had crushed the front compartment. Mariska Hargitay suffered a small scar above her right eye that remains visible today. Her brother sustained cuts and bruises, but no life-threatening injuries. Emergency responders arrived at the scene within minutes of the crash. The fog continued to hamper rescue efforts and created dangerous conditions for other vehicles approaching the accident site. Paramedics pronounced the 3 adults dead at the scene. The children were transported to a local hospital for treatment of their injuries. The crash led to federal requirements for rear underride guards on large trucks, designed to prevent cars from sliding underneath trailers during rear-end collisions. The Ricardo Hornos burning car crash incident. On March 15, 1987, Ricardo Hornos finished his shift at a downtown San Francisco office building. The 28-year-old maintenance supervisor walked to his car in the parking garage. Hornos drove a 1985 Honda Civic that he had purchased 6 months earlier. The compact car had 87,000 miles on the odometer and needed minor repairs, but it provided reliable transportation for his daily commute to his home in Daly City. Rain had been falling steadily since early afternoon. The storm created slick conditions on Highway 101 where standing water collected in low-lying sections of roadway. Hornos merged onto the southbound lanes around 6:15 p.m., joining the heavy evening traffic. Visibility was reduced due to spray from other vehicles and the steady rainfall. Most drivers had reduced their speed to account for the wet conditions. About 12 miles south of downtown, traffic began to slow near the Candlestick Park exit. A minor fender bender in the right lane had created a bottleneck, forcing vehicles to merge left. Cars were moving at approximately 25 miles per hour in stop-and-go patterns. Hornos followed about 3 car lengths behind a delivery truck, maintaining a safe distance on the wet pavement. A panel van in the left lane suddenly lost control on a patch of standing water. The driver overcorrected, sending the van skidding sideways across 2 lanes of traffic. The van struck the delivery truck in front of Hornos, causing a chain reaction collision. The truck jackknifed into Hornos' Honda, pushing it into the concrete center barrier at about 35 miles per hour. The impact with the barrier ruptured the Honda's fuel tank. Gasoline spilled onto the hot exhaust system and ignited immediately. Flames spread rapidly under the car and began entering the passenger compartment through gaps in the floor pan. Dense black smoke filled the interior within seconds, making it impossible for Hornos to see the door handles or window controls. Hornos tried to open the driver's door, but the impact had jammed the mechanism. The door handle moved freely but would not engage the latch. He attempted to roll down the window using the manual crank, but the handle had broken off during the collision. Hornos then tried to reach across to the passenger door, but his seatbelt had locked in place and would not release. The buckle appeared to be functioning normally, but the mechanism would not disengage under pressure. The fire spread rapidly through the engine compartment and began melting the plastic dashboard components. Toxic fumes from burning vinyl and foam filled the car's interior. Hornos covered his nose and mouth with his shirt sleeve, but the smoke continued to penetrate his lungs. He could hear other drivers outside attempting to break the windows with tools and rocks from the roadside. 2 truck drivers stopped their vehicles and ran to assist. They struck the rear window repeatedly with a tire iron, but the safety glass held together despite forming spiderweb cracks. The front windshield proved equally resistant to their efforts. The fire had grown too intense for them to approach the driver's side door, where flames were now visible through the windows. By the time emergency crews arrived, the Honda was fully engulfed in flames. Firefighters deployed foam to suppress the blaze, but the intense heat prevented immediate rescue attempts. The car's interior temperature had reached over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hornos had succumbed to smoke inhalation and thermal injuries before rescuers could extract him from the vehicle. The fire department required nearly 20 minutes to extinguish the blaze and cool the wreckage sufficiently for recovery operations. Investigation revealed that the fuel tank rupture and subsequent fire were caused by the specific angle of impact with the barrier, which drove sharp metal fragments into the tank wall. The Ryan Fellows drag racing crash incident. On August 7, 2022, Ryan Fellows arrived at Las Vegas Motor Speedway for filming with the Discovery Channel's Street Outlaws television series. The 41-year-old drag racer from Amarillo, Texas, had been competing professionally for over 15 years. Fellows drove a heavily modified 1998 Nissan 240SX that produced over 1,200 horsepower through its turbocharged engine. The car featured a full roll cage, 5-point racing harness, fire suppression system, and other safety equipment required for professional drag racing. The filming session was part of the show's No Prep Kings series, where drivers compete on tracks without traditional drag racing preparation like traction compound. Fellows had competed in dozens of similar events across the country. The Las Vegas Motor Speedway provided a controlled environment with professional safety crews, medical personnel, and proper emergency equipment stationed throughout the facility. Fellows completed his pre-run safety checks around 3:30 p.m. The crew verified that his helmet was properly secured and that all safety systems were functioning correctly. The ambient temperature was 102 degrees Fahrenheit, creating challenging conditions for both engines and tires. The track's surface temperature exceeded 140 degrees, reducing available traction for the high-powered vehicles. During the 8th mile pass, Fellowes' Nissan accelerated normally off the starting line. The car reached approximately 180 miles per hour by the 660-foot mark, running slightly quicker than his qualifying time from earlier in the day. Onboard telemetry later showed the engine was producing full power, and all systems were operating within normal parameters. Fellowes maintained control through the middle section of the track. At approximately the 1,000-foot mark, traveling near 200 miles per hour, the car suddenly veered toward the right side of the track. The rear suspension appeared to fail, causing the vehicle to lose directional stability. Fellowes attempted to correct the slide, but the extreme speed made recovery impossible. The car began rotating clockwise as it left the prepared racing surface. The Nissan struck the concrete barrier at an oblique angle while still traveling at approximately 150 miles per hour. The initial impact occurred on the passenger side, causing the vehicle to launch to the air and begin tumbling. The car completed 2 full rotations before striking the barrier a second time, this time on the roof and driver's side. The roll cage absorbed much of the impact energy, but the forces exceeded the structure's design limits. Safety crews reached the wreckage within 90 seconds of the impact. The car had come to rest upright but was heavily damaged throughout the passenger compartment. Fellowes remained conscious initially and were able to respond to rescue personnel. The safety crews used hydraulic tools to remove sections of the roll cage and extract him from the vehicle. The extraction process required 12 minutes due to the extent of structural damage. Fellowes was transported by helicopter to University Medical Center in Las Vegas, arriving within 30 minutes of the crash. Medical personnel worked to stabilize his condition, but the injuries sustained during the high-speed impact were too severe. Fellowes had suffered massive internal trauma despite the protection provided by his safety equipment. He died from his injuries at 6:47 p.m., approximately 3 hours after the accident. The crash investigation revealed that a rear suspension component had failed due to metal fatigue, causing the loss of control. The part had been inspected according to racing protocols, but microscopic cracks had developed from repeated stress loading during previous races. The Diane Schuler wrong-way crash incident. On July 26, 2009, Diane Schuler loaded 5 children into her 2003 Ford Windstar minivan at Hunter Lake Campground in Parksville, New York. The 36-year-old mother from West Babylon had spent the weekend camping with her family. Schuler was driving her 2 children, Aaron 2 and Brian 5, along with her 3 nieces, Emma Hance 8, Allison Hance 7, and Katie Hance 5. The children had enjoyed swimming and hiking during their weekend getaway and were looking forward to returning home. Schuler began the drive home around 9:30 a.m. The route would take them south on Route 17 through the Catskill Mountains before connecting to other highways leading back to Long Island. Schuler had made this drive many times before and was familiar with the roads. She stopped at a McDonald's in Liberty, New York around 10:30 a.m. to purchase breakfast for the children and use the restroom. Video surveillance from the McDonald's showed Schuler appeared normal during the stop. She walked steadily, interacted normally with the cashier, and helped the children with their food. The group spent about 15 minutes at the restaurant before continuing their journey. Schuler purchased coffee, and the children ate Egg McMuffins and hash browns during the stop. Around 11:37 a.m., Schuler stopped at a Sunoco gas station in Liberty. She purchased a bottle of Absolute vodka and some orange juice. Surveillance cameras captured her making these purchases alone, while the children remained in the minivan. Schuler appeared to move normally and showed no obvious signs of impairment during this transaction. She paid cash for the items and returned to the vehicle. At approximately 1:02 p.m., Schuler called her brother Warren Hance from her cell phone. She told him she was not feeling well and was having trouble seeing clearly. Hans offered to come get them, but Schuler said she would pull over and wait for him. The call lasted about 4 minutes, and Hans immediately left his home to drive north and locate them. This would be their final conversation. Around 1:15 p.m., Schuler entered the Taconic State Parkway going the wrong direction at the Pleasantville Road interchange. The parkway is a divided highway with a grass median separating northbound and southbound traffic. Schuler drove south in the northbound lanes for 1.7 miles, traveling directly into oncoming traffic. Multiple drivers called 911 to report the wrong-way vehicle. The first 911 call came in at 1:33 p.m. from a motorist who reported seeing a red minivan driving south in the northbound lanes near Briarcliff Manor. Additional calls followed from other drivers who had to swerve to avoid collisions. State police immediately dispatched units to intercept the vehicle, but Schuler continued driving at approximately 70 miles per hour against traffic. At 1:35 p.m., Schuler's minivan collided head-on with a 2004 Chevrolet Trailblazer driven by Michael Bastardi, 81. The SUV also carried Bastardi's son Guy, 49, and their family friend Daniel Longo, 74. The impact occurred at a combined speed of approximately 140 miles per hour as both vehicles were traveling at highway speeds in opposite directions. The collision completely destroyed both vehicles. Schuler died instantly from massive trauma, as did 4 of the 5 children in her van. The 3 men in the SUV were also killed immediately upon impact. Only Schuler's 5-year-old son Brian survived the crash, suffering broken bones and severe injuries but remaining conscious. Emergency responders found him hanging upside down in his car seat, crying but alert. The Fireball Roberts NASCAR crash incident. On May 24, 1964, Glenn Fireball Roberts arrived at Charlotte Motor Speedway for the World 600 race. The 35-year-old NASCAR champion from Daytona Beach, Florida, had won 33 races in his career and was considered one of the sport's most skilled drivers. Roberts drove a white and gold Ford Galaxy 500 for Holman Moody Racing, one of NASCAR's premier teams. The car featured a 427 cubic inch V8 engine producing over 400 horsepower and could reach speeds exceeding 150 miles per hour on Charlotte's high-banked oval. Safety equipment in 1964 NASCAR was minimal compared to modern standards. Roberts wore a standard helmet and seatbelt, but roll bars were primitive and fire suppression systems did not exist. The fuel cell was a basic metal tank mounted in the trunk area without modern safety bladders or foam filling. Drivers wore cotton uniforms that provided little protection against fire. The cars carried no onboard fire extinguishers or emergency shut-off systems. The race began at 6 p.m. under overcast skies with temperatures in the mid-80s. Roberts started from the 3rd position and quickly moved toward the front of the field. His Ford handled well in the early laps, and he was running in 2nd place when the first caution flag appeared on lap 7. Roberts had been averaging over 140 miles per hour on the 1.5-mile tri-oval, maintaining close contact with race leader Fred Lorenzen. As the field bunched up for the restart, Roberts was running directly behind Ned Jarrett's Ford in the inside line. The cars were traveling approximately 100 miles per hour when Jarrett's vehicle suddenly slowed due to engine problems. Roberts had less than 1 second to react as Jarrett's car dropped back toward his position. The closing speed between the 2 vehicles was nearly 40 miles per hour. Roberts attempted to steer left to avoid Jarrett, but Junior Johnson's Dodge was already occupying that position. With nowhere to go, Roberts' Ford struck Jarrett's rear bumper and became airborne. The car flipped twice before landing upside down in a shower of sparks along the concrete retaining wall. The impact ruptured the fuel tank, and gasoline sprayed across the hot exhaust system and engine components. Fire erupted immediately as the fuel ignited. Roberts remained conscious and trapped inside the overturned vehicle as flames engulfed the cockpit area. The fuel continued, feeding the fire, creating temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit around the driver's compartment. Roberts struggled to free himself from the seatbelt and crawl through this driver's side window opening, but the intense heat and smoke made escape nearly impossible. Track workers and fellow drivers rushed to the scene with portable fire extinguishers, but the primitive equipment was inadequate for a gasoline fire of this magnitude. Ned Jarrett and several other drivers attempted to pull Roberts from the burning car, suffering burns to their hands and arms in the process. The track's fire truck required nearly 2 minutes to reach the accident scene due to its location on the far side of the speedway. Rescue crews finally extracted Roberts from the wreckage after battling the flames for over 3 minutes. He had sustained 3rd-degree burns over 40% of his body, primarily on his face, hands, arms, and torso. Roberts remained conscious during the extraction and was transported immediately to Charlotte Memorial Hospital. Medical personnel began treating him for severe thermal injuries and smoke inhalation. Despite initial optimism from doctors, Roberts' condition deteriorated over the following weeks. The extensive burns became infected, and he developed pneumonia from smoke damage to his lungs. Roberts underwent multiple skin graft surgeries and spent weeks in the hospital's burn unit fighting for his life. His weight dropped from 185 pounds to less than 140 pounds during his hospitalization. On July 2, 1964, 39 days after the crash, Glenn Fireball Roberts died from complications related to his injuries. The cause of death was listed as pneumonia and infection secondary to thermal burns. Roberts' death shocked the NASCAR community and prompted the sanctioning body to implement its first major safety improvements, including better fire suppression systems and fuel cell regulations. Hitendra Rajbar. On January 21, 2021, the crowded railway system of Mumbai, India, became the scene of one of the most gruesome train accidents ever recorded. Hitendra Rajbar, a 27-year-old migrant worker, had boarded a local train at Mumbai station around 12:20 a.m. The late-night commuter trains are known for their dangerous overcrowding, with passengers often forced to stand on the footboard, a narrow metal step on the outside of the car. Rajbar was one of those passengers, clinging to the doorway as the train accelerated to its cruising speed of 80 kilometers per hour. The practice was common, but deadly. The gap between the train and trackside infrastructure could be measured in centimeters, not inches. As the train sped through the darkness between stations, Rajbar's head struck a signal pole alongside the track. The impact was catastrophic. Witnesses described hearing a sickening sound followed by screams from other passengers. The force of the collision at such high speed was so severe that Rajbar was decapitated instantly. What followed was even more disturbing. His body fell from the train onto the tracks near Ulhasnagar station, but his head remained inside the train compartment. Fellow passengers were thrown into panic as they realized what had happened. The severed head traveled with them for kilometers. Railway authorities later recovered Rajbar's head when the train reached Ambernath railway yard. It had rolled beneath a seat, discovered by cleaning staff who immediately alerted police. Meanwhile, track workers found his headless body lying beside the rails, already cold in the January night air. Medical examiners confirmed the decapitation was instantaneous. The skull separated completely from the spine by the tremendous force of impact. The death highlighted the perilous reality faced daily by Mumbai's 7.5 million train commuters. For Rajbar, the routine risk of hanging from a doorway became a split-second tragedy. His life literally cut short on the narrow margin between survival and disaster. Patrick Ward. On March 15, 2025, the famous Death Railway in Kanchanaburi, Thailand lived up to its ominous name when it claimed the life of Patrick Ward, a 42-year-old British tourist. The railway, built during World War II by prisoners of war and forced laborers, stretches through some of Thailand's most breathtaking mountain scenery. Thousands died during its construction, giving the line its grim nickname long before Ward's fatal decision. Ward was traveling with a tour group on the historic train as it crossed the wooden Wang Pho Viaduct, a spectacular section where the tracks cling to a cliff face above the River Kwai. The vintage train moved slowly across the trestle bridge, offering panoramic views that have made it a photographer's paradise. As the train rounded a curve, Ward saw what he thought would be the perfect photo opportunity. According to witnesses, Ward opened one of the train's doors, leaning outward to capture the dramatic vista below. The train had no automatic locking mechanisms or modern safety features. Several passengers reported shouting warnings when they saw him hanging partly outside the carriage. Seconds later, Ward lost his balance as the train swayed. He fell from the moving train, plummeting 8 meters down to the rocky terrain below. Other tourists watched in horror as his body tumbled through the air, striking several wooden support beams before disappearing from view. The train continued moving for nearly a minute before staff became aware of the accident. Rescue workers found Ward's body near Crazy Cave at the base of the viaduct. Medical examiners later determined he had survived the initial fall but suffered catastrophic internal injuries and massive blood loss. Marks on his hands showed he had tried to grab at rocks and vegetation as he fell, a futile attempt to stop his descent. His camera was found still clutched in his hand, the final image frozen on its display. Jeannette's Creek train wreck. On October 27, 1854, a dense fog settled over Jeannette's Creek near Chatham, Ontario. The thick white blanket reduced visibility to mere feet, creating the first condition in what would become a cascade of fatal errors. The Great Western Railway operated 2 trains that night, a passenger express carrying more than 100 people and a gravel train that had departed earlier. The gravel train had fallen behind schedule, struggling through the fog at a crawl. Railroad rules required it to clear the main track completely before the passenger train's scheduled passage, but the crew had stopped short of the siding. The conductor, assuming they still had time, left the rear brakeman to flag down any approaching trains while he walked ahead to the station. What the conductor didn't know was that the passenger express was also running late. As it approached at nearly 25 miles per hour, the fog made it impossible for the engineer to see the warning signals. The rear brakeman of the gravel train had failed to place torpedoes, explosive warning devices, on the track as required. In the silence of the foggy night, passengers later reported hearing only the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails before a sudden violent jolt. The passenger locomotive slammed into the rear of the gravel train. The wooden coaches behind it telescoped into one another. The front 3 passenger cars compressed like an accordion. Those inside were crushed by splintering wood and the twisting metal. Many died instantly, their bodies mangled beyond recognition. Others survived the impact but found themselves trapped beneath wreckage as fire broke out from the overturned oil lamps. Rescuers described hearing screams from within the burning pile of timber and iron. The flames spread quickly through the wooden coaches, turning the wreckage into a funeral pyre. When the final count was made, 52 people had lost their lives, some from impact, others from fire, and some from a combination of both. Bodies were found still seated, arms locked together in final embraces, frozen in their last moments of terror. Olga Permanova. On February 3, 2025, the scenic Padimenik railway line in Sri Lanka became the site of a tragedy that would shock tourists and locals alike. Olga Permanova, a 28-year-old Russian travel influencer, was among a group of tourists riding the famous blue train through the lush hills between Kandy and Ella. The route is renowned for its breathtaking views, winding through tea plantations and steep mountain passes that have made it a favorite among photographers and social media enthusiasts. The train was moving at approximately 40 kilometers per hour as it navigated navigated a tight curve with a steep drop on one side and a rock face on the other. According to witnesses, Permanova opened the window and leaned out to capture the perfect photograph for her travel blog. She had built her online following by taking stunning, often risky shots in exotic locations. What Permanova didn't see was the jagged rock formation protruding slightly into the train's path. As she extended her upper body through the window, her head struck the rock at full speed. The impact was violent and immediate. Fellow passengers described a sickening sound as her skull connected with solid stone. The force knocked her unconscious and nearly pulled her completely through the window. Other tourists grabbed her legs, preventing her from falling off the train entirely. Blood poured from a massive wound on the right side of her head as the train continued for another 3 minutes before it could be stopped. When emergency services finally reached the remote location, Permanova was still breathing, but barely. Medics found her with a depressed skull fracture and severe brain trauma. Her pupils were fixed and dilated, a sign of catastrophic neurological damage. Despite being airlifted to Kandy Hospital, doctors could not save her. The brain hemorrhage was too extensive. Permanova died 17 hours after the impact, never regaining consciousness. Her final photograph, recovered from her camera, showed her smiling reflection in the train window, seconds before the fatal collision. Tyler Byrne. On February 9, 2021, a routine track inspection near Surbiton Station in southwest London ended in tragedy, when a railway worker's life was extinguished in seconds. Tyler Byrne, a 30-year-old experienced track technician, was part of a 4-person team checking rails for microscopic cracks and defects. This essential maintenance work took place on active tracks, with trains still running on adjacent lines. Byrne and his colleagues were working on what's known as Line 3, while trains continued to operate on Line 4 beside them. Safety protocols required a lookout to warn the team of approaching trains, giving them time to reach a position of safety. But on that cold February morning, multiple failures in planning and communication created deadly conditions. At 11:35 a.m., a passenger train from London Waterloo to Salisbury approached the worksite. It was traveling at 76 miles per hour, full line speed. The designated lookout was positioned where the curvature of the track limited how far ahead they could see. Warning time was reduced from the required 10 seconds to just 3 seconds. The warning shout came too late. Byrne, focused on inspecting a rail joint, had just seconds to react. Investigators later determined that he became aware of the danger when the train was only 7 meters away. By then, it was physically impossible for him to reach safety. The train's emergency brakes were applied, but physics made the collision unavoidable. The impact threw Byrne's body 85 feet from the point of collision. The train struck him on his right side with such force that every major organ suffered traumatic damage. His ribs shattered on impact, sending bone fragments into his lungs and heart. Medical examiners found his spine was severed in 2 places. Death was not instantaneous. Paramedics who arrived within minutes found Byrne with a pulse, but it faded as they worked. He was pronounced dead at the scene at 12:14 p.m. The train driver, who had been powerless to prevent the collision, required trauma counseling after witnessing the impact up close. Subway dragging death. On September 12, 2023, a routine evening commute in New York City turned deadly in a matter of seconds. The 59th Street Columbus Circle station was packed with the usual rush hour crowd when a 37-year-old financial analyst, late for a dinner appointment, sprinted down the stairs toward the platform. The southbound number 1 train had just arrived, its doors already open with passengers filing in and out. The man, whose name was withheld from the early reports at the family's request, made a fatal decision that thousands of commuters make safely every day. He attempted to squeeze through the closing doors as the train prepared to depart. The subway's door sensors, designed to detect large objects, failed to register the thin strap of his messenger bag that became caught between the rubber edges. Witnesses on the platform watched in horror as the train began to move. At first, the man ran alongside, trying to keep pace while pulling at his trapped bag. For approximately 3 seconds, he managed to stay upright. Then, inevitable physics took over. The train accelerated to 15 miles per hour while the man could not exceed 12. He lost his footing and was dragged along the platform's edge. His body struck a trash can, spinning him toward the gap between the platform and train. Commuters screamed for the train to stop, but the operator, isolated in the front car, remained unaware of the emergency unfolding 6 cars behind. The man fell into the narrow gap, his body tumbling onto the electrified third rail and then into the path of the train's wheels. The electrical current alone would have been fatal, delivering 625 volts directly through his torso. But death came even more quickly as the multi-ton steel wheels passed over his midsection, severing his body almost completely in half. As if one train wasn't enough, a northbound number 2 express train to pass through the adjacent track at that exact moment. The driver reported feeling an unusual bump but continued, unaware they had struck a human being already dying on the tracks. When emergency responders finally reached him minutes later, they found a scene so gruesome that 3 experienced paramedics later required counseling. The Steininger beard incident. Hans Steininger was 69 years old and held the world record for the longest beard. His facial hair measured 4.5 feet in length, flowing well past his waist when fully extended. Steininger lived in Verr&uuml in Austria, where he served as a local official. The beard had grown over decades of careful cultivation and maintenance. For practical reasons, Steininger had developed a daily routine. Each morning, he would carefully roll his massive beard and secure it inside a leather pouch. This system allowed him to move freely through his daily activities without the beard dragging on the ground or catching on objects. The leather pouch had become as essential to his routine as putting on his shoes. The year was 1567, and Steininger had perfected his beard management system through years of trial and error. He would methodically coil the hair section by section, ensuring no tangles formed. The leather pouch hung from his belt, keeping the beard secure and out of the way. This routine had worked flawlessly for years, allowing him to maintain both his record-breaking facial hair and his mobility. On that September day, Steininger went about his usual morning preparations. He dressed for his official duties and prepared to leave his home. The beard rolling process was so automatic that he rarely thought about it anymore. His hands moved through the familiar motions of coiling and securing the hair. Then the fire began. Smoke started billowing from a building in the town center. The flames spread quickly between the wooden structures. Panic erupted as residents rushed to escape the growing inferno. Church bells rang out, warning the entire community of the emergency. Steininger heard the commotion and immediately understood the danger. Fire was every medieval town's greatest fear. Wooden buildings packed closely together created the perfect conditions for disaster. He needed to evacuate immediately. In his haste to flee, Steininger made a fatal oversight. The urgency of the situation disrupted his methodical routine. He rushed toward the door without properly securing his beard in its leather pouch. The massive length of hair unfurled as he moved, trailing behind him like a rope. Steininger ran through the streets, focused on escaping the spreading flames. His 4.5-foot beard flowed freely behind him, completely exposed and unrestrained. The hair that had made him famous now dragged across the cobblestones as he fled. In his panic, Steininger stepped directly onto his own beard. His foot caught the hair, jerking his head backward with tremendous force. The sudden stop sent him tumbling. His body twisted as he fell, unable to break the fall properly. Steininger hit the ground hard. The impact snapped his neck with a sharp crack. The man who had spent decades nurturing the world's longest beard died instantly, killed by the very feature that had brought him fame. His lifeless body lay on the street, his record-breaking beard spread around him. The chocolate factory incident. Svetlana Roslina was 24 years old and worked at the Sergiev Posad confectionery factory in Fedortsovo, Russia. The facility produced chocolate on an industrial scale, operating massive machinery designed for commercial candy production. Svetlana had been employed at the factory for several months and was familiar with the equipment and safety protocols. The chocolate production process involved enormous vats filled with molten chocolate heated to extremely high temperatures. These industrial containers held thousands of gallons of liquid chocolate, maintained at temperatures exceeding 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The molten mixture was thick, viscous, and deadly to anyone who might fall into it. On that day in 2016, Svetlana reported for her regular shift. The factory hummed with its usual activity as workers operated the complex machinery required for mass chocolate production. Steam rose from the heating vats and the sweet smell of chocolate filled the air. It was a routine workday at the confectionery facility. Svetlana carried her mobile phone with her during her shift, as was common for workers at the factory. The phone served as her connection to the outside world during the long work hours. She kept it close while performing her assigned duties around the production equipment. Two different accounts emerged about what happened next. Some witnesses reported that Svetlana accidentally dropped her phone near one of the massive chocolate vats. According to this version, she leaned over the edge of the container, trying to retrieve the device from where it had fallen. Other witnesses provided a different explanation. They claimed Svetlana was pouring flour into the chocolate mixture when her bag became caught. She allegedly leaned further into the vat while trying to free the stuck container, losing her balance in the process. Regardless of the exact cause, Svetlana fell forward into the vat of molten chocolate. The liquid was deep enough to completely submerge a human body. The extreme temperature of the chocolate made any chance of survival impossible. The thick, viscous nature of the molten chocolate made it nearly impossible for Svetlana to surface or escape. Unlike water, the heavy liquid chocolate provided no buoyancy. Instead, it pulled her down while burning her skin at temperatures that would cause immediate and severe injuries. Factory workers who witnessed the accident immediately attempted a rescue. They tried to reach Svetlana with long tools and equipment, but the depth of the vat and the dangerous nature of the molten chocolate made their efforts futile. The industrial machinery could not be stopped quickly enough to drain the container. Emergency services arrived at the factory within minutes of the accident. Rescue workers faced the impossible task of extracting someone from a vat of molten chocolate. The temperature alone made any direct contact lethal for potential rescuers. Despite all rescue attempts, Svetlana could not be saved. She died from the severe burns and drowning caused by falling into the industrial chocolate vat. The 24-year-old factory worker became the victim of one of the most unusual workplace accidents ever recorded. The hospital soup incident. Ilda Vitor Makiel was 88 years old when she suffered a stroke stroke in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The elderly woman was immediately taken to a local hospital for emergency treatment. Her condition required intensive medical care and constant monitoring by the hospital staff. Due to complications from the stroke, Ilda could not eat solid food normally. The hospital established a feeding routine for Ilda using a feeding tube. This medical device was inserted directly into her stomach, allowing liquid nutrition to bypass her mouth and throat. Feeding tubes are standard medical equipment used for patients who cannot swallow safely after strokes or other medical emergencies. Hospital protocol required staff to prepare liquid nutrition and deliver it through the feeding tube at regular intervals. The process involved connecting a syringe or feeding bag to the tube and slowly introducing the liquid nutrition directly into the patient's stomach. This procedure was routine and performed multiple times daily for patients like Ilda. The feeding process was straightforward and safe when performed correctly. Staff members were trained to distinguish between feeding tubes, which led to the stomach, and intravenous lines, which delivered fluids directly into the bloodstream. These two systems served completely different purposes and required different types of nutrition. On the day of the incident in 2012, hospital staff prepared soup for Ilda's feeding. The soup was intended to provide nutrition through her feeding tube, as had been done successfully on previous occasions. The liquid consistency made it suitable for tube feeding when properly administered. However, the hospital staff made a catastrophic error. Instead of connecting the feeding apparatus to Ilda's feeding tube, they mistakenly connected it to her intravenous line. This meant the soup would be injected directly into her bloodstream, rather than her stomach. The staff member began the feeding process without realizing the deadly mistake. Soup flowed through the IV line and entered Ilda's circulatory system. Foreign matter entering the bloodstream creates immediate and severe medical complications that can be fatal within minutes. As the soup entered her bloodstream, Ilda's body began to shut down. The foreign particles in the liquid caused her blood vessels to block and her circulation to fail. Her cardiovascular system could not process the solid particles and fats contained in the soup. The soup particles created blockages in Ilda's pulmonary arteries, the blood vessels that carry blood to her lungs. These blockages prevented oxygen from reaching her bloodstream and caused a massive pulmonary embolism. Her breathing became labored as her lungs struggled to function. Medical staff quickly realized their error when Ilda began showing signs of severe distress. They immediately stopped the feeding process and began emergency treatment. However, the damage was already done. The soup had created multiple blockages throughout her circulatory system. Despite emergency interventions, the pulmonary embolism proved fatal. Ilda's cardiovascular system could not recover from the massive blockages caused by the soup injection. She died from complications directly related to the medical error that sent soup into her bloodstream instead of her stomach. The deodorant obsession incident. Jonathan Capewell was 16 years old and lived with his family in Oldham, England. The teenager had developed an intense concern about personal hygiene and body odor. His worry about smelling unpleasant had grown into a daily obsession that controlled much of his routine. Jonathan's solution was to use deodorant extensively throughout each day. He would spray deodorant all over his entire body, not just his underarms as intended. This ritual occurred at least twice daily, sometimes more frequently if he felt particularly anxious about his scent. The deodorant Jonathan used contained propane and butane as propellants. These gases were designed to spray the deodorant effectively, then dissipate into the air. However, when used in large quantities in enclosed spaces, these chemicals could accumulate to dangerous levels. Jonathan performed his deodorant routine in his bedroom with the door closed. The confined space prevented proper ventilation, allowing the propane and butane gases to build up in the air. Each application added more chemicals to the already saturated atmosphere of his room. Over several months, Jonathan's excessive deodorant use created a dangerous pattern. His body was absorbing increasing amounts of propane and butane through his skin and lungs. The chemicals accumulated in his bloodstream faster than his body could process and eliminate them. The process was gradual and showed no obvious warning signs. Jonathan felt fine and continued his normal activities. His family noticed his extensive deodorant use, but considered it typical teenage behavior. No one realized the deadly chemical buildup occurring in his system. On the morning of his death in 1998, Jonathan followed his usual routine. He covered his entire body with deodorant spray in his closed bedroom. The familiar hissing sound of the aerosol filled the small space as he applied the product systematically. Within minutes of completing his deodorant application, Jonathan collapsed. His heart began beating irregularly as the accumulated chemicals reached toxic levels in his bloodstream. The propane and butane had disrupted his cardiac rhythm, triggering a massive heart attack. Jonathan's family found him unconscious in his bedroom. Emergency services arrived quickly, but the teenager was already beyond help. His heart had stopped functioning due to the chemical poisoning caused by months of excessive deodorant use. Medical examination revealed that Jonathan had 10 times the lethal dosage of propane and butane in his blood. The chemicals had accumulated over time until they reached fatal concentrations. His obsession with smelling fresh had killed him through chemical poisoning. 10 years later, the same tragic scenario repeated itself. Daniel Huxley, a 12-year-old boy from Nottingham, died under identical circumstances. Like Jonathan, Daniel had had become obsessed with deodorant use and died from propane and butane poisoning. The younger boy's death proved that Jonathan's case was not an isolated incident, but a recurring danger of aerosol abuse. The flying fire hydrant incident. Humberto Hernandez was 24 years old and lived in Oakland, California. On that day in 2007, he was walking down a city street, going about his normal daily routine. The weather was typical for the area, and foot traffic moved at its usual pace through the urban neighborhood. Fire hydrants lined the streets of Oakland as standard municipal infrastructure. These metal fixtures connected directly to the city's water main system, providing emergency access for firefighters. Each hydrant contained water under tremendous pressure, designed to deliver large volumes quickly when needed. The water pressure in Oakland's system operated at approximately 50 to 100 pounds per square inch. This pressure was necessary to push water through miles of underground pipes and up to the highest floors of buildings during emergencies. The force was contained safely within the hydrant's metal casing under normal circumstances. Humberto walked along the sidewalk, unaware of any impending danger. Traffic moved normally on the street beside him. Cars passed at regular speeds, their drivers focused on navigating the familiar urban routes. Nothing suggested that this would be anything other than an ordinary day. A car traveling down the street began to veer off course. The vehicle's trajectory shifted toward the sidewalk area where the fire hydrants were positioned. The driver appeared to lose control of the vehicle for reasons that remained unclear to witnesses. The car struck the fire hydrant with significant force. The impact immediately severed the hydrant's connection to the underground water main. Instantly, pressurized water began erupting from the broken connection point with tremendous force. The water pressure that normally flowed safely through the hydrant system was now unleashed without restriction. The force was equivalent to a powerful explosion, but instead of expanding gases, it involved thousands of gallons of water under extreme pressure seeking the path of least resistance. The severed fire hydrant became a projectile. The water pressure launched the heavy metal fixture into the air with tremendous velocity. The hydrant, weighing approximately 200 pounds, flew through the air like a missile fired from an invisible cannon. Physics and timing converged in the most unlikely way possible. The trajectory of the airborne fire hydrant intersected perfectly with Humberto's position on the sidewalk. He had no time to react or take evasive action. The heavy metal object was traveling too fast for human reflexes to respond. The fire hydrant struck Humberto directly in the face with devastating force. The impact delivered the equivalent energy of a small artillery shell. The metal fixture had been accelerated to lethal velocity by the water pressure that normally operated safely underground. The force of the impact was immediately fatal. Humberto's injuries were so severe that death was instantaneous. The same water pressure system designed to save lives during fires had transformed a routine piece of city infrastructure into a deadly projectile. Witnesses to the incident could barely comprehend what they had seen. The sequence of events seemed impossible. A person killed by a flying fire hydrant powered by water pressure. The statistical probability of such an occurrence was astronomical. Emergency responders arrived at the scene within minutes. They found Humberto's body on the sidewalk with the fire hydrant nearby. Water continued gushing from the broken main, flooding the street. The car that had started the chain of events had come to rest nearby. The incident required both police investigation and emergency water main repairs. City workers shut off the water supply to stop the flooding while investigators tried to understand the bizarre sequence of events that had just unfolded. Humberto Hernandez died from blunt force trauma caused by being struck by a pressurized fire hydrant. The 24-year-old had become the victim of one of the most improbable accidents ever recorded in urban America. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.